Elena Rodriguez was only 3 years old when she first told her mom it was going to rain. Not just any rain, but exactly 17 drops on their front porch at 2:30 in the afternoon. Her mother, Rosa, laughed it off as typical child imagination. But when those 17 drops fell at precisely 2:30, Rosa felt a chill run down her spine. This wasn't the first strange thing about Elena, and it wouldn't be the last. Rosa and her husband Miguel had found Elena as a tiny baby 18 years ago. They were driving home from visiting Miguel's sister when they saw strange lights in the desert sky. Curious and a bit worried, they pulled over to investigate. That's when they found her. A perfect, healthy baby girl wrapped in what looked like a silver blanket that seemed to shimmer and change colors. There was no sign of any parents, no car accident, nothing. Just Elena, looking up at them with the most unusual eyes they'd ever seen. They were blue, but not quite blue. Sometimes they looked green, sometimes gray. The authorities searched for weeks but never found any trace of where she came from. Rosa and Miguel, who had been trying to have children for years, took it as a miracle. They adopted her legally and raised her as their own. But as Elena grew up, they realized their little miracle was unlike any other child they knew. For starters, Elena never got sick. While other kids in their small Arizona town caught colds and flu, Elena stayed perfectly healthy. Her body temperature was always a few degrees lower than normal, but she never seemed cold. In fact, she preferred cool weather and would often sit outside during winter nights staring at the stars for hours. Then there were her abilities. Elena could solve math problems that kids twice her age struggled with. She taught herself to read by age 4, not from books but by somehow understanding the patterns in letters and words. When Rosa asked her how she knew these things, Elena would just shrug and say, "I just do, Mama." School was challenging, but not because Elena couldn't keep up. It was the opposite problem. She was too advanced, too different. While other first graders were learning to add and subtract, Elena was drawing complex geometric patterns during art time. Her teacher, Mrs. Patterson, called Rosa in for a meeting. "Elena is incredibly gifted," Mrs. Patterson explained. "But she's also, well, unusual. Yesterday she told me exactly when the fire drill would happen, down to the minute. She said she could feel it in the air. And her drawings, they're not typical child artwork. They look like star maps or scientific diagrams." Rosa went home that day feeling worried. She loved Elena more than life itself, but she could see her daughter was struggling to fit in. The other children found Elena strange. She was too quiet, too serious, too different. During recess, while kids played games, Elena would sit alone watching clouds and predicting exactly when and where shadows would fall. The dreams started when Elena turned 7. She would wake up crying, talking about flying through space and seeing planets she'd never heard of. She described cities made of crystal and beings that communicated without speaking. Rosa would hold her and tell her they were just dreams, but Elena insisted they felt more real than being awake. "Mama," Elena said one morning over breakfast, "in my dream there was a place where the sky was purple and there were 2 suns. The people there, they looked almost like us, but their skin had tiny sparkles like glitter. They were teaching me things about numbers and stars." Miguel, who was usually the practical one, started getting concerned when Elena began predicting things that happened days later. She told him their neighbor's dog would go missing on Tuesday and return on Friday with a hurt paw. She was right. She predicted that Rosa's sister would call with news about a new job exactly 3 days before it happened. "Maybe she's just really observant," Miguel suggested, though his voice carried doubt. But being observant couldn't explain how Elena knew their mail carrier would be late because his truck would break down, or how she could tell them exactly what Rosa's boss would say during her meeting before Rosa had even gone to work. As Elena got older, she learned to hide these abilities. She realized they made people uncomfortable. In 4th grade, she stopped, raising her hand in class even when she knew all the answers. She pretended not to notice when other kids were about to get in trouble or when teachers were having bad days. She kept her weather predictions and her strange dreams to herself. But hiding who she was became exhausting. Elena started spending more time alone. reading advanced science books from the library that were meant for high school students. She was particularly drawn to astronomy and physics, subjects that somehow made perfect sense to her even though she'd never studied them formally. Rosa noticed her daughter becoming more withdrawn. Elena would spend entire afternoons lying in their backyard, staring up at the sky with such intensity it seemed like she was searching for something. When Rosa asked what she was looking for, Elena would just say, "I don't know yet, Mama, but I'll know when I find it." By the time Elena reached middle school, she had become an expert at appearing normal. She learned to give wrong answers sometimes, to act surprised when her predictions came true, to pretend she didn't notice things that others missed. But late at night, when she thought her parents were asleep, Rosa would find her daughter outside, looking up at the stars with tears in her eyes. "Sometimes I feel so alone," Elena confided to Rosa one night when she was 13. "Like I don't belong here. But I don't know where I do belong." Rosa's heart broke for her daughter. She wanted to help, but how could she explain feelings and abilities that she didn't understand herself? All she could do was hold Elena close and promise that someday everything would make sense. Neither of them knew how right Rosa was, or how dramatically everything would change when Elena finally discovered the truth about where she really came from. 20 years had passed since Elena's strange childhood, and she had built what looked like a perfectly normal life. She earned her PhD in astrophysics, got married to a kind engineer named David, and landed her dream job at the new Deep Space Research Center in Arizona. To everyone around her, Dr. Elena Rodriguez was just another brilliant scientist who happened to be really good at her work. But Elena still carried her secrets. She still had those vivid dreams about distant worlds and strange beings. She still knew things she shouldn't know, like when equipment was about to malfunction or when solar storms would hit Earth days before they were officially predicted. She'd just gotten better at hiding it all. Her marriage to David had been happy, but brief. He was a good man who loved her deeply, but Elena always felt like she was living behind a wall. How could she explain to him that sometimes she would wake up at night feeling homesick for a place she'd never been? How could she tell him about the voices she heard in static, or the way certain star patterns made her cry without knowing why? After 3 years, they divorced amicably. David said he felt like he was married to someone who was always looking at the sky, waiting for something he couldn't understand. Elena threw herself into her work after that. At 38, she was one of the youngest department heads at the Research Center. She spent her days analyzing data from radio telescopes, searching for signs of life in the universe. It was ironic, she thought sometimes. Everyone assumed she was looking for aliens out there, when the truth was she was trying to understand the alien inside herself. Her breakthrough came on a Tuesday night in November. Elena was alone in the lab, working late as usual. She was reviewing data that had come in from the Deep Space Array when she noticed something strange. Hidden in what most people would dismiss as background noise was a pattern. It wasn't random static, it was organized, mathematical, almost like music. Elena's hands started shaking as she isolated the signal. The numbers, the sequence, the rhythm. It was identical to something she'd been seeing in her dreams since she was 7 years old. For over 30 years, she'd been drawing these same patterns in her notebooks, thinking they were just her imagination. She worked through the night, her heart racing with each new discovery. The signal was definitely artificial, definitely intelligent. But more than that, it was speaking to her in a language she somehow understood without ever learning it. As she decoded more of the message, coordinates began to emerge. Longitude and latitude, pointing to somewhere in the Nevada desert. "This can't be real," Elena whispered to herself, but her hands kept working, driven by an instinct she couldn't explain. By morning, she had translated most of the message. It contained detailed information about genetic structures, not human, DNA, but something similar yet distinctly different. There were star charts showing the position of Earth relative to other systems, and there was something that looked like a biological signature, like a genetic fingerprint waiting to be matched. Elena printed everything and locked it in her desk drawer. She needed to think, needed to process what this meant. But as she tried to leave the lab, A massive headache hit her like a sledgehammer. She stumbled, grabbing onto her desk for support as images flooded her mind. She saw herself as a baby, but not on Earth. She was in a place with purple skies and 2 suns, just like in her dreams. There were beings there who looked almost human, but not quite. Taller, with skin that seemed to shimmer, and eyes that changed colors like hers did. They were looking at her with such love, such sadness, as if they were saying goodbye forever. The vision lasted only seconds, but it left Elena, gasping and confused. These weren't dreams anymore. They felt like memories, real memories of a life she'd forgotten. Over the next few weeks, Elena became obsessed with the signal. She stayed late every night, working alone, afraid to share her discovery with anyone. The headaches came more frequently now, and with them more flashes of memory. She remembered learning to communicate without speaking, remembered lessons about mathematics and physics that were far beyond Earth's current understanding. Her colleague, Dr. Kevin Park, started noticing changes in her behavior. Elena had always been focused, but now she seemed almost manic. She'd forget to eat, forget to go home, forget to return phone calls. Her work, which had always been excellent, became either brilliant beyond belief or completely incomprehensible. "Elena, you're scaring me," Kevin told her one afternoon when he found her staring at the wall, tears streaming down her face. "What's going on? You can talk to me." But how could she explain? How could she tell Kevin that she was receiving messages from space that seemed to be calling her home to a place she'd never been? How could she tell him that every time she decoded more of the signal, she felt less human and more like something else entirely? The final piece of the puzzle came 3 weeks later. Hidden in the deepest part of the message was something that made Elena's blood run cold. It was her own genetic sequence, not the human DNA she'd grown up with, but something else. Something that explained why she'd never gotten sick, why her body temperature was different, why she could predict things that hadn't happened yet. The coordinates in Nevada weren't just random. They were calling her home. And according to the message, something was buried there, something that had been waiting for her for 38 years. Elena stared at the printouts spread across her desk. She could ignore this. She could delete everything, pretend she'd never seen it and go back to her normal life. But deep down, she knew there was no going back. The truth was out there in the desert, and no matter how much it scared her, she had to find it. She took a leave of absence, the next day telling her supervisor she needed time to deal with a family emergency. In a way, that wasn't even a lie. Elena drove through the Nevada desert with shaking hands, following the GPS coordinates she'd decoded from the mysterious signal. She'd told herself 100 times during the 4-hour drive that this was crazy, that she was probably having some kind of breakdown. Normal people didn't abandon their jobs to chase messages from space. Normal people didn't feel pulled toward empty desert locations by dreams they'd had since childhood. But Elena had stopped pretending she was normal a long time ago. The coordinates led her to a spot that looked like every other part of the Nevada desert. Endless sand, scattered rocks, and absolutely nothing else for miles. Elena parked her car and stepped out into the blazing afternoon sun. According to her GPS, she was standing exactly where the message had told her to go. But there was nothing here except dirt and heat. She walked in slow circles, not really knowing what she was looking for. Maybe this whole thing had been her imagination after all. Maybe the stress of working alone for weeks had finally gotten to her. She was about to give up and drive home when her foot caught on something buried in the sand. Elena dropped to her knees and started digging with her hands. The sand was hot and coarse, but she kept going. After a few minutes, her fingers touched something smooth and metallic. Her heart started racing as she dug faster, clearing away more sand. What she uncovered defied every rational thought she'd ever had. It was about the size of a briefcase made of some kind of metal that didn't look like anything from Earth. The surface was perfectly smooth, with symbols carved into it that seemed to shift and change as she looked at them. But the strangest part was that she could read them, even though she'd never seen anything like them before. The symbols said Elena in letters that weren't quite letters, in a language that wasn't quite a language, but that she understood perfectly. With trembling hands, Elena touched the surface of the object. The moment her skin made contact with the metal, The world exploded into light and memory. Suddenly, she wasn't in the Nevada desert anymore. She was standing in a room with walls that seemed to be made of living crystal, surrounded by beings who looked almost human, but weren't quite. They were tall and elegant, with skin that had a subtle shimmer, and eyes that changed color with their emotions. And she knew them. She knew them all. "Elena," one of them said, and she recognized the voice from her dreams. This was her father, though not in any human sense. His name was something her human mind couldn't quite hold on to, but she knew his voice, his face, his love for her. "We don't have much time," he continued, and Elena could feel the urgency in his thoughts. "The ship is failing. We have to get you to safety." She was seeing her own memories now, memories that had been hidden from her since she was a baby. She remembered this place, this ship, these people who were her family. They weren't from Earth. They weren't even from this part of the galaxy. They were refugees from a war that had destroyed their homeworld, searching for a safe place to start over. But they never made it. Elena watched her own memories play out like a movie. She saw her parents making the desperate decision to send her away when their ship began to crash. She saw her mother, tears streaming down her shimmering face, wrapping baby Elena in a special blanket designed to protect her during the journey to Earth's surface. "You are the bridge," her mother had whispered as she held her one last time. "Someday, when you're ready, you'll help both our peoples understand each other." The ship had crashed in the New Mexico desert 38 years ago. Elena's parents and the other survivors had died on impact, but the ship's final systems had protected her escape pod, carrying her safely to the ground where Rosa and Miguel had found her hours later. As the memories faded, Elena found herself back in the Nevada desert, still touching the metallic object. But now she understood what it was. This wasn't part of the crashed ship. This was something her parents had sent ahead, a message pod designed to find her when she was old enough to understand the truth. The object began to glow softly, and more information flowed into Elena's mind. She learned about her hybrid nature, part human, part something else. Her parents had studied Earth's people for years before the crash, and they'd made her genetically compatible with human life while preserving the abilities that made her special. But the most important information was still coming. The message wasn't just about her past, it was about Earth's future. The war that had destroyed her parents' homeworld was spreading across the galaxy. The beings responsible were called the Devourers, and they consumed the life force of entire planets, leaving dead worlds behind, and they were coming toward Earth. Elena's people had been trying to warn inhabited worlds, to help them prepare for what was coming. The message hidden in the radio signals wasn't just for her, it was for all of humanity. Her parents had designed her to be a translator, a bridge between two species who needed to work together to survive. The metal object grew warmer under her hands as it downloaded the last of its information directly into her mind. Star charts, technology specifications, communication protocols, everything Earth would need to defend itself. But it would only work if people believed her, if they trusted someone who wasn't entirely human to speak for humanity. Elena sat back on her heels, overwhelmed by everything she'd learned. For 38 years, she'd felt like she didn't belong anywhere. Now she discovered she belonged to two worlds, and both of them were counting on her. As the sun began to set over the desert, Elena carefully lifted the object and carried it back to her car. She knew what she had to do next, even though it terrified her. She had to go back to civilization and tell people the truth about who she was and what was coming. She had to stop hiding and start being the bridge her parents had designed her to be. The drive back to town felt like the longest journey of her life. Elena kept looking in her rearview mirror, but she wasn't looking back at the desert. She was looking back at the normal, quiet life she was about to leave behind forever. Elena made it back to her apartment at 3 a.m, exhausted and overwhelmed. She sat at her kitchen table with the alien object in front of her, trying to figure out what to do next. How do you tell the world that aliens are real and that one of them is sitting in your kitchen drinking coffee? She called in sick to work again, knowing that Kevin would be worried. She'd already been gone for 3 days without explanation. But Elena needed time to think, to plan how to reveal what she'd learned without sounding completely crazy. The problem was, there was no good way to tell people you're half alien. Elena spent the next 2 days trying to write everything down, attempting to create some kind of report that would make sense to other scientists. But every time she read it back, it sounded like science fiction. Radio signals from space, buried alien technology, recovered memories of another world. Who would believe any of it? Her phone kept ringing. Kevin called 6 times. Her supervisor, Dr. Williams, called twice. Even Rosa called from Arizona, worried because Elena hadn't returned her messages. Elena let them all go to voicemail. She wasn't ready to talk to anyone yet. On the 3rd day, her decision was made for her. Elena was in her living room, holding the alien object and trying to understand more of the information it contained, when she heard helicopters overhead. She looked out her window and saw 3 black SUVs parked on her street. Men in dark suits were getting out, along with people carrying equipment that looked military. Her heart sank. Someone had been tracking her. Kevin, her colleague and friend, had gotten worried enough to call the authorities when Elena missed their weekly research meeting. He knew she'd been working on something secretive, and when she disappeared without explanation, he feared she might be in trouble. What he didn't know was that the government had been monitoring unusual activity at research facilities for years, looking for exactly the kind of discovery Elena had made. The knock on her door came at exactly noon. "Dr. Rodriguez? This is Agent Thompson with Homeland Security. We need to speak with you about your recent research activities." Elena looked through the peephole and saw at least 6 people standing outside her door. There was no point in running. Where could she go that they wouldn't find her? And besides, maybe this was meant to happen. Maybe this was how the truth was supposed to come out. She opened the door. "Gentlemen," she said, trying to keep her voice steady, "I think we have a lot to discuss." What happened next changed everything. Though not in the way Elena had expected, Agent Thompson and his team were professional but suspicious. They'd been monitoring communications from Elena's research facility and had detected the unusual signal she'd been working with. When she disappeared for 3 days, they assumed she might have been compromised by a foreign government or terrorist organization. They were not prepared for the truth. Elena sat in her living room, surrounded by federal agents, and told them everything. She showed them the decoded message, the coordinates, and finally the alien object itself. When she touched it and demonstrated how it responded to her, how information flowed directly into her mind, the skeptical looks on their faces changed, to shock and then to fear. "This is beyond our clearance level," Agent Thompson said quietly into his radio. "We need the special response team. Now." Within an hour, Elena's apartment was swarming with scientists, military personnel, and government officials. They tested the object with every piece of equipment they had. They took blood samples from Elena, ran scans, asked her thousands of questions. Everything confirmed what she'd told them, but that only made them more nervous. The real chaos started when someone made a mistake. Dr. Patricia Collins, a government scientist who'd been brought in to analyze the alien object, was running tests when she accidentally activated one of its communication functions. The object began glowing brightly and projecting what looked like a holographic star map above Elena's coffee table. At that exact moment, a news helicopter was flying overhead, investigating reports of unusual government activity in the area. The helicopter's camera captured everything through Elena's window. The glowing object, the hologram, Elena standing in the middle of it all looking very much like she belonged there. The footage was on social media within minutes. Alien technology started trending before the government could even begin damage control. Elena's face was everywhere. The woman who'd made first contact with extraterrestrial intelligence. Elena watched her normal life disappear in real time. The news vans arrived first, setting up camp outside her apartment building. Reporters called. Her neighbors, her former colleagues, even Rosa and Miguel in Arizona. Her childhood friends started giving interviews about how Elena had always been strange, always different, always seeming to know things she shouldn't know. The government tried to control the narrative, but it was too late. Too many people had seen the footage. Too many scientists confirmed that the object was beyond human technology. Too many details matched Elena's story perfectly. Within 48 hours, Elena was the most famous person on Earth. Scientists around the world were analyzing copies of her data. World leaders were demanding meetings. Religious groups were calling her everything from a prophet to a demon. Conspiracy theorists claimed they'd known about people like her all along. Elena sat in a secure government facility, watching her life play out on news channels around the world. The scared little girl who'd spent her childhood hiding her differences was gone. In her place was someone the entire world was talking about, arguing about, and most importantly, listening to. Agent Thompson sat across from her, shaking his head. "Dr. Rodriguez, you realize there's no going back from this, don't you? Your life as you knew it is over." Elena looked at him and smiled sadly. "Agent Thompson, my life as I knew it was never real to begin with. Maybe it's time I found out what my real life is supposed to look like." Outside the facility, the world waited for answers, and Elena finally understood that she was the only person who could give them. 6 months after the world learned Elena's secret, nothing was the same. Not for Elena, not for humanity, and certainly not for Earth itself. Elena stood at the podium in the United Nations building in New York, looking out at representatives from every country on the planet. It still felt surreal. 6 months ago, she was a quiet scientist who just wanted to understand radio signals from space. Now she was humanity's official ambassador to the cosmos, the bridge between two worlds that desperately needed each other. The changes had been overwhelming at first. After the footage of her with the alien technology went viral, Elena became a global phenomenon overnight. Every news channel wanted interviews. Every scientist wanted to study her. Every government wanted to meet with her. It was exactly the kind of attention she'd spent her whole life trying to avoid. But then something unexpected happened. Other people started coming forward. First, it was Dr. Anthony Chen, a marine biologist in California, who'd been having the same strange dreams as Elena since childhood. Then Dr. Priya Patel in Mumbai, who could predict earthquakes with impossible accuracy. By the end of the first month, 18 people around the world had identified themselves as having similar abilities to Elena's. The government testing confirmed what Elena had suspected. They were all hybrids like her, the children of refugees from the same distant world. Their parents had scattered across Earth before the crash, hoping to save at least some of their people by blending in with humanity. The children had been raised as humans, never knowing their true heritage until Elena's discovery awakened something in all of them. Elena wasn't alone anymore. For the first time in her life, she was surrounded by people who understood exactly what it felt like to be caught between two worlds. The scientific community was divided at first, just as Elena had expected. Some researchers embraced the discovery, working around the clock to understand the technology and knowledge that Elena and the other hybrids could access. Others dismissed it all as mass hysteria or an elaborate hoax, but the proof was undeniable. The alien technology worked. The star charts were accurate. The genetic analysis confirmed non-human DNA sequences that couldn't be explained by terrestrial evolution. Most convincingly, the 18 hybrids were able to work together to decode technologies and scientific principles that were centuries ahead of human understanding. Elena's adoptive parents, Rosa and Miguel, became celebrities themselves. When reporters tracked them down in Arizona, at first they were terrified about what this meant for their daughter's safety. But when they saw how happy Elena looked for the first time in years, surrounded by people who were like her, they supported her completely. "We always knew Elena was special," Rosa told a reporter. "We just didn't know how special. But she's still our daughter, and we're proud of her for helping everyone understand that being different isn't something to hide." The religious communities struggled with the implications more than anyone. Some groups declared Elena and the other hybrids to be angels or divine messengers. Others called them demons or a sign of the end times. Most, thankfully, eventually settled on the idea that God's creation was simply much bigger and more wonderful than anyone had imagined. But Elena's biggest challenge wasn't dealing with the media attention or the religious debates. It was preparing humanity for what was coming. The information from her parents' message pod had been clear. The Devourers were still out there consuming planets and moving systematically through the galaxy. Earth wasn't their immediate target, but they were getting closer. Humanity had maybe 10 years to prepare, and that preparation would only be possible if humans and the hybrid descendants worked together. Elena and her fellow hybrids spent months sharing everything they could access from their genetic memories: advanced physics, clean energy technologies, medical breakthroughs that could eliminate most diseases, communication systems that could reach other inhabited worlds. It was like downloading centuries of human progress all at once. The technology, sharing, wasn't without problems. Some countries tried to classify the information as military secrets. Others wanted to use the advanced knowledge to gain advantages over their neighbors. Elena and the UN had to work carefully to ensure that the life-saving technologies were shared equally among all nations. Standing at the UN podium, Elena looked down at her prepared speech and then set it aside. She'd given dozens of formal presentations over the past 6 months, but today felt different. Today felt like the real beginning. 6 months ago, Elena began, I was a woman who spent her whole life trying to fit in, trying to be normal, trying to hide the things that made me different. I thought being different meant being alone. I thought it meant being wrong somehow. She paused, looking out at the sea of faces. Presidents, prime ministers, scientists, reporters, and ordinary people who'd traveled from around the world to be here. I was wrong about that. Being different doesn't mean being alone. Being different means having something unique to offer. And right now, humanity needs everything unique we can get. Elena activated a holographic projector that had been built using the hybrid technology. Above the UN Assembly Hall, a 3-dimensional map of the galaxy appeared, showing the slow but steady advancement of the Devourer forces toward their section of space. This is our reality now, Elena continued. We are not alone in the universe, and that means we face challenges that are bigger than any one country, any one planet, any one species. But it also means we have help. We have knowledge. We have each other. The hologram shifted to show other inhabited worlds that had successfully defended themselves by working together across species lines. 10 years from now, Earth will face the greatest test in human history. But 10 years from now, humans won't be facing it alone. We'll be facing it as part of a galactic community that we're already beginning to join. Elena smiled as she looked out at the assembly. My name is Dr. Elena Rodriguez. I'm a scientist, a daughter, a friend, and yes, I'm half human and half something else. But most importantly, I'm someone who believes that our differences aren't what divide us. They're what make us strong enough to survive anything. The applause that followed wasn't just for Elena. It was for the future she'd helped make possible, and for the courage it would take for everyone to embrace it. This story outline balances realistic human elements with science fiction concepts, creating a narrative that feels grounded in possibility while exploring themes of identity, belonging, and the courage required to embrace one's true nature.